can get started. So I'm Ben Prime, um, and I'll be co-doing this. Really, Haas is going to be doing most of this continuous authorization and monitoring risk management framework overview from a perspective of where he came from. He was CDM lead, PM for under the Booz Allen Hamilton contracts. He also had a lot of time as a information system security owner in one of the DHS sub agencies, along with the security control assessor for a decent portion of his time. So from an insightful level, along with what ServiceNow can bring from a digital transformation of RMF. And then I'm Ben Prime. I was a Fed contractor for a decade and a half before I started more and more into cybersecurity. I still kept some of my assessor days and FedRAMP 3PAO days. So I have a secondary major, I would say, in risk management framework and enterprise risk management. But from there, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Haas.
Great, thank you, Ben. So today, really our goal here is to talk about a little bit about RMF and how ServiceNow as a platform is trying to help transform the world of RMF for all us practitioners here. So RMF, for those of you that may not be aware, is a risk management framework. It's what the federal government uses to make sure that our systems are secure and that all the policies and needs for compliances are met. Now, we can't really start to talk about where we want to go with transformation until we really look at where we are right now and where we've been. Right, ever since FISMA was enacted back in 2002, there's been some consistent challenges that different GRC tools, traditional tools since then have been trying to address up until now, up until ServiceNow's platform-based approach. And really what we've seen in the audience base, in our customer base, and just in the world of security out there is that there's a lot of manual processes. Now what that means, I heard an interesting way somebody had explained this. Manual means maybe. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but the more I think about it, I understood that better, right? Manual means maybe I'll get it on time. Manual means maybe I've talked to the right person. Manual means maybe the job will get done the first time, the right time, right? And with manual processes, a lot of times there are silos within the process that may not be understood, right? They're just the way we do business. It's the oil of the machine of cybersecurity at many points. Now, what that ends up leading to is longer lead times into ATO, and that's the authority to operate. When new systems need to be put in place and there needs to be some benefit and value driven out of the development or investment work that's been put into bringing new technology in to serve the federal government and ultimately the American people. So how do we do that? How do we reduce that time if everything is manual? One of the things I heard from our customers consistently, and what I've seen myself in my past life, is when we're trying to get to ATO, it can be an arduous and long process. The shortest I've seen is like 8 months, I believe, and sometimes upwards of 2 years. So think about that. All the people, processes, money, resources, investments that are on hold for 2 years, right, until the federal government can actually get some benefit and value from those investments. Let me take a pause here because I know we've got a mixed audience here. Can we take a quick vote or maybe a quick survey? I'd like to do a little market research here now that I've got you guys on the call. What have you seen for a typical ATO process, or maybe what has been your quickest and what's been your longest time? If you could just go into the chat, and I'd just like to see some numbers. If it's a bit 8 months, 10 months, 2 years, 36 months. What have you seen out there?
Continuously never accredited, always in interim.
You can't beat infinity, so that's a great one right there. Awesome, 6 months. Okay, that's actually pretty. That's actually pretty good from what I've seen. All right, yeah, and so it's consistent, right? It's consistently we're seeing that lag to value it's something that's impacting ultimately our taxpayer dollars and the benefit that government can provide us, right? So we're seeing that as a consistent challenge. In addition to that, a lack of visibility, not just into the specific controls that you might be tracking and inefficiencies around that, but down to a granular level. And even when we're talking about the security posture of any given system and understanding where we are, we really talk about it in a as a picture in time perspective, right? A point in time perspective. What that means, it's never in real time, right? It's always in arrears that we're talking about what's been captured, what's our processes going forward to try to mitigate whatever we found in terms of findings and challenges to the system. So not having that real-time approach, not having a unified source of truth that can be referenced, those are challenges that really have pervaded the industry thus far. And finally, when we're talking about integrations and the last bullet there, no mobile or AI or chatbots, that really speaks to the fact that these tools traditionally have been created for very specific purposes, right? With very specific audiences, ISOs and ISSMs, right? Information system security officers and their leadership. At times, risk officers, but not always. The SCA, my favorite role in the past, right? The system control, security control analyst, right, or assessor roles, right? People who are become very familiar with the ways that those tools work, but don't necessarily have to integrate with the rest of the system and rest of the stakeholders. And it's not a natural or organic process to understand the security posture of a system or to even assess. Instead, it's an exercise that actually gets everybody on edge. Any stakeholder that's related during the time of an assessment, it's really one of the more stressful times in their career, right, or in that project. And so, how do we remove these challenges? How do we transform RMF, and how do we modernize it? Right, when we're talking about technology and where innovation has taken us, ServiceNow really speaks to what some have called the fourth industrial revolution. Fourth industrial revolution, sorry. Yeah, well, what that really means is it's not just modernization for modernization's sake. It's not just digitizing pieces of paper or spreadsheets and throwing spreadsheets into the cloud, right? It's really to have efficiencies created and better business outcomes, better resolutions to what your mission is trying to resolve. And so as we're addressing these challenges to RMF, we're really looking to transform how RMF actually helps the federal government and ultimately, again, as I say, the citizenship that it serves. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to you, Ben. Okay, Ben, you might be on mute because I can't hear you.
Yep, look at that. Thank you. That's why we work together as a team. That's the way risk management should work all together, right?
Yes, sir. Speaking of that, right?
So when we talk about ServiceNow has a full breadth of, if you want to call it our federalized way of governance, risk, and compliance, or you want to shift to the Gartner integrated risk management, we do both. We are a platform of platforms. We make the world of work better for even risk management. So we do integrate all of those things. A lot of what happens though in that IT is that we have these top levels. It doesn't matter if it's enterprise risk management playbook, if it's ISO 31000, 27000, or if it's NIST risk management framework. There's this underlying concept that the enterprise or the enclave or the mission needs to have defined some of those things or prepared for some of those things or established context for you to follow on to at that bottom layer. So our tool does everything up to the enterprise risk management level, and then continuous authorization and monitoring is specifically targeted for the processes and workflows that NIST has provided as guidance. And what I mean by that is we talked about that one holistic platform that ServiceNow brings to the table, where workflows and knowledge and machine learning and everything is part of that one data model, along with integrations into other major systems of record, where a lot of the information that you're auditing or need to have visibility into for your risk posture is there. So being able to see that and tie that back to your policies, your compliance, your governance, many to one, meaning do I need to follow NIST and HIPAA, or do I need to follow GDPR, whatever that thing might be, FedRAMP, CMMC, those things tie together with the risks, and then audit is that piece, part of the assessment process that we'll go through. We leverage that because the engagement to do an audit for the security control assessor. But a lot of that data can be gathered from the ServiceNow platform. We know what change is doing and exactly what that change team is doing for a patch and who's approved it and who was in that chain of command. So having that data at your fingertips, because the entire organization is already working on ServiceNow or starting to work on ServiceNow, gives you that full visibility. That's that adoption into true integrated risk management, where Gartner was really striving for, not only having the different silos of financial risk, IT risk, governance risk, all tied together, but also tying that to what the risk is foundationally being drawn from. So from there, we're going to talk about tier 3. We just talked about how a lot of that prepare stuff is coming from tier 1, the organization, tier 2, the mission, enclave, business process, and how did we frame that, and CAM at the tier 3 information IT system level. So from there, Haas.
Thanks for that lead in, Ben. So what we're planning on doing for the rest of this presentation, or the bulk of this presentation, is really to run through RMF to understand what the steps are, what are the things that those involved from a security policy compliance perspective. What are we thinking about as we're trying to address the all the things necessary to build out that authorization package that will ultimately be served on the platter for the accept or denial that lets us get to the real work that we need to do, right, outside of the security. And so in that effort, what we're going to do is go through the process, talk about the different steps, and then probably take maybe a minute or two to jump into what our CAM product will actually provide, right? What does that transformation look like, and how does that actually, as Ben spoke to earlier, how does it actually integrate with the rest of the teams outside of security, right? Those system owners that want to get their work done, those stakeholders, those system admins, right? How are they actually involved, and where's that data that they're providing? How is that dynamically understood by the platform? Now, what we'll start with first is this slide here. This is the categorization, the prepare and categorization phase. In this phase of RMF, what we're really doing is preparing the system and everything that we need to know about the system to start the process of RMF. In this phase, we understand what the system boundary is. We assign roles and we identify what our common controls will be, and really get ready to have an understanding of what data types and what really will be impacted. What are we trying to protect here, right? We like to say that, or I like to say, you can't treat your cookie jar and your piggy bank the same, right? Another way to look at it is that, if I could ask you to imagine every door or a drawer or anything that you put something in in your house with a lock, right? Would you put a lock on everything? Would you put a lock on your sock drawer, right? Would you put a lock on your some cabinets in your kitchen, right? Some things just require more protection than others, and some don't, right? But not having specific controls on every single piece of data doesn't necessarily mean that's not adequate or appropriate, right? So for example, if I went to my cookie jar and I needed laser eye scanning along with a 56 character password that's randomly blockchain created, right? Just to get a cookie. Well, I'll tell you, I'll probably be a lot skinnier than I am today, right? It just doesn't make sense, right? But understanding that protection level and what's needed, that's really what's essential here, right? One thing I wanted to ask, as we're understanding system boundaries, that's something that I've seen in my career to be one of the things that has been most elusive. Even as I was working on the CDM team in a previous lifetime, I've noticed that really was the very first step was the hardest step to get over, right? So here's another question I'll throw out there. I like taking polls and questionnaires, right? So get used to it. With your system boundaries, how many of y'all have seen a perfect system boundary that doesn't need to be touched, doesn't need to be reviewed, that the next time you're assessing it, it's great, it's been updated every single time any node or IP changes? And this might be a trick question, although with some smaller systems I've seen that actually does happen. So let's hope those guys aren't present, right? Quick vote. Oh, silence means agreement. That's even better, right? That means nobody's seen that. Yeah. So, or that means everybody's seen that, right? That's just the reality, right? That there's never, it's never, it's usually really hard to make sure that your system boundary is up to date. And if there's other parts of understanding your boundary, your architecture, it changes, right? And it's not necessarily a bad thing that it changes. That's the sign of improvement. It's a sign of innovation. It's a sign of investment that goes into the um, the information system and all the technology that's being there used to promote a mission forward. But how do we make sure that all of that is up to snuff and really doing what they need to do? So with that, I think I've spoken a little bit a bit much about this slide. I will go ahead and continue. One last thing I did want to talk about was that it's not just about the architecture and the boundary that you have. It's also the relationships and connections you have externally too, because you might be getting data from external systems. So part of this process is understanding that as well. All right, thanks, Ben, for the slide change. The second part of this, right, we'll be talking about selecting and implementing controls. This is where we really understand what the control baselines are, what types of controls need to be tailored, because that's most usually the case when we start getting into the nitty gritty, right? Not everything is just left at baseline. And then what controls do we inherit? What relationships need to be behind those inheritances, right? A lot of times when we have those controls set up in terms of inheritance, it's kind of like, oh, not my problem, right? read it there in black and white in the SSP. This just says it's not something I need to worry about. But that's not the real case if you're really trying to get down to understanding your system in a holistic manner. And again, because of a lot of the challenges we've seen already, a lot of times these efforts are from a security perspective, we want to have the right level of security, but also we want to make sure that we're working as a team across these different stakeholders, across all the different hands that need to come in play to make this effort work together. It really is a team effort. It really is a shared community of security behind all of the systems that ever do end up getting ATO'd. And then finally, once all the documentation is there, once you have everything ready to start promoting and to understanding what that control landscape looks like, we're going to have to assess. But before that, my question is, do we have full control visibility, right? Has it ever been the case where we actually understand at every single detail who's involved, what controls are tailored, what are used, why, and then is that repeatable? And usually it's not the case, again, because of the manual efforts that stagnate that type of advancement. And so I think with that, I want to open up the floor for Ben to come on in and show us what CAM can do in terms of that control visibility.
Yeah, and this is one of those places where Haas was integral, I was integral. Our product management was asking us about what is the day in the life, how do we do things, that control inheritance, they were wrapping their heads around it. So we kind of worked with them on what this concept would be. Where do you inherit controls from? Well, I inherit them from either a third party, or usually if it's like a general support system, I inherit them from my organization. So we went to that epiphany of, okay, so if you're inheriting it from a third party, you could bring that data in, or if you're inheriting from the organization, wouldn't you have already done that within the concept of our integrated risk management suite? And the answer was yes. So that's where we came up with the understanding of baseline controls. Part of it is, once I have my FIPS 199 and have I overridden it and done my FIPS or NIST 860 selections, do I need to add any controls? Is there HSPD 12, CFR, whatever those things might be? But as I go through them and I either mark them as not applicable, I'm recording those results and those justifications in there, and I can have questionnaires if certain things happen. But inheriting from a common control and creating a common control. Foundationally, we said that if I'm going to inherit, I can't just inherit from the ether, like Haas was talking about, because I don't know if I'm inheriting risk or security. And in my days, I was before FedRAMP when I was an assessor. So I would assess, say, the Exchange email server, and then I would come back two years later and they'd be like, oh, we put that in Office 365. It's just up in the cloud, no FedRAMP. And I'm like, well, what are you inheriting? their security or what? And they're like, I don't know, we just don't have to do it anymore. So that's where we got that concept of when you create a common control, if I was to say in my system boundary, I will be the provider of that common control, then I actually have to go through its full life cycle of attesting to it, monitoring it, testing it through that. Then it becomes an inheritable control. So now when I go to inherit a control, I'm not just inheriting from the ether, I inherit from the control provider, and that control provider actually shows me as continuous status. Now, as this changes, since my boundary is linked to my not applicable controls, my inherited controls, and my baseline controls, I do have full visibility and I can flag things that come up. If I want to say SI controls are critical to me because I have a critical confidentiality, well, I can bring those things in and I have that understanding in my realm. I think that's where a lot of different systems don't actually link as well together, along with understanding what's going on in the organization. This control can go non-compliant because we're watching IT. It could be a configuration management control, and I'm going to inherit that from the IT admin staff. Well, if they're not putting backup plans in every change they do, and my policy states that I need a backup plan, well, I can go look at that table and I can automatically find issues without calling them up and feeling like I'm nagging them and them trying to hide stuff from me or go, oh, yeah, here's a list of 30. See, these all have backup plans. I can go look for myself without having to do that extra work. I think this is one of those biggest things where we work directly with the product management to actually understand what full visibility into your system and accreditation boundary actually means to a system owner or an information system security officer. So from there, we'll come back into assessing the controls, because right now we've just stated what's going to be applicable and if we've inherited any, but now comes Haas's favorite part of the world, which is the assessment.
Yeah. Well, I was going to stop you, Ben. What do you mean people are going to hide the truth from you? Isn't security forefront of everybody's mind? Why would an admin do that? I see you laughing there in your screenshot there. So yeah, with that, it's perfect segue right into the assessment phase, right? And this is where I lived a lot of my world, right? Most of my life here in security, and I, the thing is, assessors play a very, very important role, especially in this critical juncture of trying to get to ATO. Now, the thing is, assessors, right? This is their job day in and day out, right? They know what controls they're looking for. They know what kind of evidences they're looking for, who to contact. But the people that are involved, the stakeholders, that family, that community that we were talking about, that it takes, right? It takes a community to raise an ATL, right? That's actually new for them many times. It's their first child, so to speak, right? Maybe I've belabored that analogy a little bit, but with that first attempt, a lot of times, or maybe it's so sparing that they don't really know all the processes, and then knowing what the outcomes are, right? So many stakeholders I've talked to are so ghastly afraid of finding an issue, right? What can I do to resolve this before time? And it's not necessarily, the situation of, well, I understand that risk will be found, right? I'll understand that through this snapshot in time, I'm getting a better understanding of what my posture is. It's, well, is there going to be a slap on the hand afterwards, right? What's involved afterwards? Now, understanding that the storyline, the process, and what's involved is part of the job of the ISO, part of the job of the SCA, the SCA, as they're working this. But as Ben said, right, a lot of times when you're operating on fear, when you're operating with that bias, you may not be able to do the best work, provide the best work. So where can we remove those barriers if there can be opportunities for automation, opportunities for some orchestration across systems and integrations that are deeply connected as we are with CAM within our CMDB within our platform, right? When those opportunities are there to just get the data right from the horse's mouth, right from that common source of truth, that single data model and platform, then really you're limiting that exposure to bias, that exposure to action based on fear that may happen at some times, right? But here we're talking about assessments leading into the ATO process. And as we're doing that, we're having interviews, multiple interviews with multiple people. Ad hoc issues come up as we're reviewing evidence and artifacts, and as we're leading into the ATO, thinking about the future, how many times I can't count the number of times actually that I've seen artifacts from 3 years ago, stale artifacts that are still being used as relevant today, with no life cycle in mind, to say that, hey, that's not really relevant in today's use case, right? And then finally, in that assessment process, as we're finding out the results of these tests, finding issues and the findings that come about, what do we do with them? What's the mitigation process? What kind of poems are generated afterwards, and how are they tracked, right? Those are some of the challenges that we have to address as we go through this ATO process, because at the end of this, we really want to be able to have a solid authorization package that really captures the essence of the system and how to move forward. All right, so with that, can we go on to the next slide, Ben? Thank you, sir. And assessment is really right at the right at the end, right before we get into the authorization phase, when we need to communicate what findings there are and what risks there's some tolerance for, right? And from there, we get that negotiation between the risk officer, the ISO, the system owner, right? What really can be mitigated? What can be accepted? How else are we going to be dealing with those findings, and what are we okay with moving forward with? Now, with CAM specifically, we're not only just able to track that residual risk from the control shortcomings, right, in terms of implementation, but also inherent risks that might also be within the system, again, because we are so deeply connected within the platform CMDB. And then finally, we're able to track plans and actions, right? These are the POAMs of mitigation. What's the next step, right? Okay, we'll give you this ATO, or maybe a conditionary ATO. What is that 6-month plan? What is a 90-day plan? What is a milestone, and what do we need to fix, and how do we track that along the way? And you're able to do that when you have all of those points of information, all those CIs that are related, deeply integrated, again, within a CMDB that's a single source of truth that the ServiceNow platform can be. All right, Ben, I think they're all ready to see one of our top features here, because at the culmination of that assessment authorization process is this beautiful document that we've all had to touch and deal with, and I don't know how many countless hours I've stared at. I wonder how simple ServiceNow can make this for our customers. You're on mute again, buddy.
Haas, I really like how much of the actual artifacts you put in there, because that whole process, you gave just a bunch of small scenarios that are painful in the day-to-day life. There are so many more scenarios that are painful in the day-to-day life, which is why we get to that 6 months to 18 months or even longer to do the accreditation. Going through that, and the bulk of the work that we just showed you can walk through, now you still have to produce a 400-page artifact, which for anybody's intents and purposes is not how you want to end a whole bunch of work, is to do a whole bunch more. So that's the other piece that we came up with. This was one of those things that we asked, like, we really wanted from our product management. So they put some extra effort into it, but we made it a template. So when you finally get through that authorize and into those monitor stages, you can click a button and you can generate an SSP. If you want to change some things and go back in the stages and then generate the new SSP with just a couple little changes, you can do that. Now, from a ServiceNow perspective, you want to be living in this whole assessment, where you've done your assessments and you've gotten your issues, where you have everything under your risk summary, from how many critical change requests, how many regular ITSM incidents or security incidents and their criticality, along with the vulnerable items or POAMs that are associated with this. You still want all of this at your fingertips. You're still going to be living that life cycle, But at some point in time, everybody wants the artifact. Either an auditor comes in and says, okay, show me your SSP so I can read through that, and your contingency plan or your access control policy. So they can do some deeper dives on the interviews and come back with other ad hoc questions. So making this document is not the fun thing to do. We make this document so you can drag and drop it. We used FedRAMP because a lot of that top level stuff of who owns it, the architecture diagrams, all of those things we talked about gathering first and throughout the life cycle, but we made them clickable, easy to use, no code templates. So you can fill in an HTML formatter, what we call a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get type editor, and you can put your logo here. You can click a little box and say, I want the field for my system accreditation boundary to populate right here. And then we'll go through, as you step through all of those 344 controls, we'll walk through them and populate them as if you said, while you were doing your control assessment, was this implemented? No. And you should have a not applicable. Or was it implemented and who owns it? Those types of things is what will automatically generate for you with just a click of a button. I think this is a big one and a big push on the product management part to get it into the first release. So from there, what actually goes into that continuous authorization and monitoring? And I'll grab this one because, like I said, my background is a lot of the security stuff with the secondary and integrated risk management. But a lot of the other security tools that we can communicate with are the configuration compliance, your STIGs, your SCAPs, your benchmarks, your USGCB, if anybody's still using that from the Windows XP days. But continuously monitoring vulnerabilities or threats, security incidents that could be against that system. Again, we went back to SolarWinds, and I think it's only the 5th time US CERT has put out a bulletin. Last time maybe Ben Kapersky selling the antivirus. But these are big things that can impact the system accreditation boundary. And by knowing these, I mean, you can figure out where you need to come back to. And Haas brought this up before in the beginning, way up in the beginning. What happens if a change is, I'm just going to open up another IP address? To ITSM and the ITIL methodology, uptime and availability, that might be just a little minor thing. Oh, and another port, that's easy. But from an accreditation boundary, what does that port actually entail? What is my interoperability? Am I talking to other systems that now change my risk? Am I now opening myself up to a PII system and I wasn't doing that before, or a HIPAA system and I wasn't doing that before? You could flag those changes automatically on the fly through DevOps and ITOM and our other tools, that if it's a port change, come back, because we need to go back to the categorization. We need to reassess our confidentiality, integrity, availability, and start here. Maybe it's just a vulnerability and we need to just double check the implementation and assessment. We don't really need to change the select or categorization steps, but we need to check our policies and statements and things like that. So there's a nice automation workflow depending on how your organization is structured on top of the ServiceNow platform. And to give a little more depth into how deep that can go, we're talking everything across the ServiceNow platform. IT service management, I gave a whole bunch of examples of change or problems or requests, but other things could come from the outside with a portfolio request. IT operations can actually monitor health in the event management, systems going down. If you have high availability, a lot of this is continuously monitoring of a high availability system. We have NOAA.gov. That can't go down because you could have a loss of life from a hurricane, tornado, or flood. They're not really dependent on confidentiality because they want to tell everybody that, but that's a great tie-in if you're high availability. Same thing with asset management. Do we have the right software? Are we licensed for the right software? And DevOps. This gets even scarier. If we're on 2-week sprints, 1-month sprints with changes, which changes are actually impacting our boundary, like that ports? DevOps could be going so fast in a monthly cycle, and our accreditation packages take almost a year. We can't go through the whole process every single time. So which types of changes would actually automatically kick off a workflow for what stage we need to get to next. Security, near and dear to my heart. This should be right on top. We're dealing with NIST 861, threat or imminent threat, from being able to mitigate vulnerabilities much more rapidly and prioritize them against the risks of the organization, along with continuously monitoring security events, configuration compliance, ties to threat intel, and our MITRE attack model was just released today. So we're getting more and more in depth into that. And then again, I said this sits on the business continuity risk management portfolio of applications. There are some platform capabilities too. Not only can you benchmark the data across the ServiceNow platform or the accreditation boundaries, but you're also fulfilling some things like data replication. Your accreditation boundaries have continuity of operations and things like that. Being able to look at the business service map. So what ITOM or ITSM is, or Discovery and ITOM is actually seeing as a visual representation of your network, can give you insight to looking at the network architecture diagrams that you attach to the SSP in the beginning. Are they really looking like they're off? Is there a change to that? So there's a lot that you can do across the platform and across the services to actually get that what is truly continuous authorization and monitoring. And then for the big prize, these aren't things that we just jumped into, but we've actually had customers implement them and get there. And I'm going to give a shout out to Accenture Federal Services, because they actually helped us with some pieces of this. They're helping us a lot with integrations. They're not the only integration partner, but we have a lot of authoritative sources out there like EMAS and CSAM and IAX and Exacta and all these other pieces that you might have to interact with. So we have some great partners that are actually engaged to not only do the risk management, enterprise risk management, but also do that interoperability between those other systems of record if your department or agency or CDM or other things require that. And they saw through customers actually implementing these things. I can't say which federal agencies, unless anybody on here wants to implement this and talk to us about that. But 75% faster ATO time. So if we talk to 6 months to 18 months, even if we can get 75% faster on the 18 months and bring it to under a year, that's huge. And then 50% faster testing time and gap analysis, just that security control assessment phase of seeing how we can mitigate things and actually get the ATO quicker. That's another piece that brings it down, because once we get those findings from the engagements or from the monitoring, how do we reduce that gap of getting back into compliance? Less you're in compliance, the more the actors could get in there. And if they are in there, what are they doing? We need to stay secure, maintain secure, so we can block out those people wanting our cookies. And then you get that continuous real-time view. That's the great thing of the ServiceNow dashboards and everything else. So what this organization ended up with was an effective enterprise risk management program. And effective is huge there. They weren't just dotting their I's and crossing their T's that I had a document and yes, I checked the box. The document was effective. The SOP or the policy and all those other things came full fruition to actually recognize and describe potential risks that can impact the agency's mission and in their delivery of services to the public. So with that, I think we're coming up close to time check.
Yeah, so one of the takeaways I got from that is this is really making sure that RMF is not just a synonym for CYA, right? We're talking about those effective measures, right? Hey Ben, I let me pause right now, right? I think we're at 15 minutes to the hour. Calvin, do we have any questions from our guests? Have you seen any pop up? Wanted to open up the floor a little bit to see if we can get some engagement.
Not yet.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. We'll give it a few minutes. I did have a question, right? Like as I'm listening to myself and you, Ben, you know, I realized, having come from that world, right, from the RMF world, from the ISO world, being a sky, this stuff seems kind of pie in the sky, right? How can this, you know, what does it take for me to get to this new transformed state of RMF from where I am now, right? Is there an implementation journey? What does crawl, walk, run? What does that look like for us? Is there something you can show us there?
Yeah, we can do that. What did Stan ask? I think we did get a couple questions, and I will come back to that. But
awesome.
What did Stan say? Who is the typical sponsor to bring this into an organization? A very good question. Usually the champion, the sponsor, once the information system security owner understands that they're going to have 90% less reminder emails going in and out of their box and a spreadsheet tracking their daily operations, they're usually the champion. But from the visibility level, when we get into some of the dashboards at the chief risk officer, chief information security officer, CEO level, that's where it all comes together, because they're the ones, well, in federal, you might even have to go to Congress. Like, I think that's where we really hit the mark, is when you get a breach and you have to go before Congress with your brand new risk assessment to attest to you were doing everything you possibly could to mitigate this and the attackers were just better. That's the scariest, biggest piece. And I think that's where it resonates. If everybody has their stuff together and it was this organized, that's where I've seen people really jump in on this, on sponsoring it. Like, we really need this. We got to get this across the organization, and we got to bring it up to the enterprise level. It's nice at the system owner level, but it can really hit those elevated positions too. You didn't have anything on that one, did you, House?
No, that was actually a on point question, kind of led into what Maya was asking as well, right?
Yeah. So the maturity journey, I'd love to say, yeah, you can install this day one and it's everything out of box. A lot of things that I showed are out of box, like the selectors from FIPS 199 to 853, that's already there for you. If you have specific policies and control overlays, those are going to be things that are specific to your organization, or how you want to test things. Yes, NIST said the agency should do vulnerability scanning in the organizational defined. There's a lot of those organizational defined things that you're going to have to get to. But the most basic principle is get off of the spreadsheets so you have more visibility and you're not trying to manage life cycles on emails and things. So start with that concept that I talked about, like I did, like we do that inheritance. Start with the general support systems. So that way they're into that accreditation boundary. And when you move up to the next stage, you can inherit more and more controls from the general support systems, from the policy and compliance, get your third party things in there. And you're going to build up accreditation boundary by accreditation boundary, and they're going to start to feed off each other per enclave. That's where you're going to get that improved schedule. You're going to start to get that single system of record. The visibility is going to be right there. Everything's going to start to populate. We do have a lot of dashboards out of the box. And since these are built on our core applications, when you start populating that data, they still tie back to, say, controls and your risk register. You're pulling those foundations in, so all of those other dashboards also work to their advantage. We do have some for CAM. And then that issues and tracking, there's going to be a slight step there. We make an easy button. I could click a brand new issue and add a task, and it would be a milestone. But what is your process? What are your thresholds? Who do you want to annoy more often or escalate? And what do you define as accelerated response? How quickly do you want to get through these? And that goes to the value that Accenture Federal did with their customers and assessing them, is what did they see and where did they want to get to? Some of those customers didn't really think they could get to 75% faster efficiency. They would have been happy with the 25%. If we can go 18 months to a year, I'll be happy. Or from a year to 8 months, I'll be happy. They didn't expect to go from 18 months to 6 months. Like, that was just epic. Like, where do you want to gauge yourself? Then you get into continuous authorization and monitoring, really getting those key risk indicators off of the platform for that solution. What questions do you want to ask the system, and at what timed intervals to get your data back so you can make decisions about this? And that's where you start to have that fully implemented framework, because now all of your accreditation boundaries have been building up of those basic general support systems. And as you bring more and more things online, we have a lot of the one networks. A lot of organizations are going to that one network methodology. These accreditation boundaries are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller as systems are maintained once and applied to many. And then orchestration and remediation, taking your security and your IT, and maybe that's the thing, like SolarWinds, there was a mandate, take this offline. There could be a button that sends it through everybody's process so they get visibility. The change control board, the ISO, the authorizing official, all know that this mandate came out, and everybody's going to do their work right now with almost no human interaction to block and remove something from the network or patch something on the network. All of that can start to be orchestrated and remediated based on your risk tolerances. Obviously, a lot of people are very risk adverse and want to have a few extra manual processes in there. We're not saying automate everything. And some people, in certain boundaries, if it's just my kiosks, I can be more risk tolerant and accepting and let everything happen automatically. Like, just every time a patch comes in, just don't even show it to me, just get it done within minutes. So that's where that life cycle is going to come from. And we usually go with some of those partners. We have a list of partners that have specifically been trained on and updated on this CAM plus our integrated risk management suite. So that's a good place to start there, is probably get that second information knowledge share from your trusted advisors.
So one of the things that really pops out here is the more organizations leverage our platform, not only are they building out that CMDB, but that really speaks back to accelerating RMF as well, right? Getting from that manualist maybe to the orchestration level, right? I always say it's an orchestra deserving of Bach and Beethoven and all the greats. So once we get to there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that came up in a call just before this was, do I have to do everything on that reevaluation? Or if a department or agency only wants to do a subset of A123 and ask me about a subset, there's a lot that's built into our GRC audit engagement where we can take an accreditation boundary in and only scope a sub portion of the work. So we don't have to come back, and a lot of people do a third of the year increments. I want to do technical controls or certain families this third of the year. We can scope that too. It doesn't have to be a complete shift from your standards, but you'll see a faster repetition as you start to adapt. We're in it for your life cycle and your journey. I think we're coming up. I guess if we have no other questions, we should leave it for questions. We wanted to plan for questions. We were going to leave like 10 minutes. And you can always come back to us for one-on-ones. We both cover federal, Haas and I. So we're always here to help.
Calvin, Calvin, do we have any others that you captured throughout the presentation?
No, so there's not in the chat, but I was going to ask, how do organizations move from 0 to 3 and seem like, how do they bring in all like people, technology, and processes for this?
So this is a high level one slide
right.
of a decent deck, and we would actually engage with each individual organization of what values did they want to hit, what milestones did they want to hit for each one of these. Like, I just want to get my critical digital assets into the system. I just want to get 3 of them. So we would plan that time and see how long and track how long it took us, and then understand how much value it was. And even within the application, when you get into audit engagement, you can track cost of the time it takes you to do the actual like security control assessment during the assessment phase or during an audit phase or during any of those things. So you just need to hit your values of, do I want to do it faster? Do I want to do it cheaper? Do I want to do it more granular? Do I want more visibility? Those are going to be pieces that need to be figured out by the organization so we can make sure that we hit your mission needs as an organization and that you do see the value as we walk through these stages. And this is just a generic template of what we've seen through customers. It's easy enough to say, I must see vulnerable items in federal. So maybe we shift some indicators over to visibility and start that as at least a stepping stone into this. All of this is adaptable journey and just a generic template for those organizations. And we get into what's your value, what's your mission, what's your objectives, and how can we help you meet those?
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Well, then with that, I guess if there's no other questions, I hope this was a good learning experience for those that have been able to join. We'll make this presentation publicly available. And if you have any other questions, please definitely feel free to reach out through through any of the resources that you have to connect with us, Caresoft, or to us directly. Appreciate everybody on here. I appreciate Ben and Calvin for the support as well. And with that, I'll give you guys back the remaining 5 minutes to start your weekend early, hopefully.
Thanks again, Haas. That was great.
Thanks, everyone.